Maybe I'll speak on the experience of Bahrain when it comes to gender parity and women empowerment. It's definitely a story that we're very proud of. I know you mentioned some of the statistics, and I think we started on maybe a negative note, and that's maybe how some people see it when they look into the future and they look on the progress that has been done. And we're talking about hundreds of years to get there. We don't look at it the same way in Bahrain. I think we're proud and privileged to have had the experience that we've had over the past year, or the past years actually, and decades. So actually just earlier this year, His Majesty the King instructed the government headed by His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince and Prime Minister, to start thinking about Vision 2050 for Bahrain. So we've had Vision 2030 that was launched back in 2008, and now we're thinking about the Vision 2050. And so to do that, we took a look back. So we're looking at the past 2 decades and also since the launch of the Vision 2030. And of course, there's lots of numbers, but definitely there was one number that was quite striking, and it's the increase in female participation in the labor market. And that percentage since 2003 till 2023 is 126%. So when you look at that number, it strikes you, but then you think, actually, it should not be surprising, because when I look at the labor market at the moment in Bahrain, so of the total labor market, female participation is about 40%. It varies from private sector to public sector. It's actually more than 50% in the public sector, about 36% in the private sector. And then when you dig deep on various sectors, it also varies. So we have about almost 40% in financial services sector. Similar story when you look at commercial registrations. So 42% of commercial registrations are held by women. About 40% of the SMEs are held and led by women. So it's actually quite a positive story. And when you think, again, we should not be surprised, because when we look back, so Bahrain is a country of firsts when it came to women empowerment. We've had the first formal education introduced back in 1928. I believe it was the first country that even allowed voting with municipalities, even before many of the European countries. So the way we see it is there has been great progress. I would say yes, COVID maybe slowed things down like it slowed many of the things, but also there were a lot of initiatives and programs that were introduced to make sure that women are not economic victims of COVID. And I can speak of a few of those later, but I think it's more, the way we see it is more of a positive story. I think we're on the right trajectory when it comes to women participation and gender parity.
Let's talk about how can the government and the private sector work together. You're our minister here. So how can the collaboration accelerate the gender equality? And then has there been any legislation in Bahrain to that effect? Are you collaborating with the private sector? So if you can shed some light for us to learn from.
Absolutely. I think you cannot actually tackle this or any other issue without the collaboration of the private and the public sector. So the answer to that is absolutely. Actually, we rely on the private sector. I think Hanadi mentioned that is the importance of really collaborating and ensuring that a big segment of society, being the private sector, is actually on board when it comes to women empowerment. So I think it's 2 parts to the question. First is legislation, and I'll add to that policy as well. And the second part is the partnership with the private sector. And again, if we look at the policy and legislation, and Noor here mentioned about the gender parity, it's actually a couple of years ago, Bahrain made it a law, or actually amended the law to ensure that there's no discrimination whatsoever when it comes to pay between the women and men of a work of equal value. So that's now actually in the law. And so there's no discrimination whatsoever. And also the interesting part of it is removing also restrictions when it comes to women working part-time, especially at night. So that also got removed from the law. Not that it really prohibited, I think, women from working, but it definitely needed to be reflected in the law itself to ensure that it really reflects the reality. So that's maybe in terms of the legislation. And actually, I'll go back to the point about COVID and the slowdown that's happened, and ensuring that women were not victims during COVID. Women made up actually in Bahrain about 75% of the task force that dealt with COVID. They were the majority of the people on the front line, from people doing the testing and the nurses. it was majority women. And so the Supreme Council for Women, headed by Her Royal Highness, the wife of His Majesty the King, ensured that there were a series of policies and directives that were issued to protect women during that period. And so women were allowed, or mothers were allowed to work from home, but also fathers of women on the front line were allowed to work from home. So that's also to give the men a chance of supporting the women in the work that they do. In addition to that, they launched a campaign to support women when it comes to mental health and mental support. And also Her Royal Highness extended a loan and a debt waiver to women who were struggling financially to pay their outstanding debt, especially those divorced, widowed, or suffering from chronic diseases. So it's policies that are reactive and that come on time in times, I guess, of difficulties that really make a difference. On the partnership, actually, there's quite a few examples when it comes to the partnership between the private and the public sector that we can touch on. And we definitely recognize the importance of that. Maybe one example that I can cover is the Supreme Council Women in Tech Incubation Program that was launched by the Central Bank of Bahrain in partnership with the Standard Chartered Bahrain, Temkeen, and Bahrain FinTech Bay. So it's quite a lot of the players in the ecosystem in Bahrain that came together to launch that program. That's one of many, actually. What we're seeing is amazing in terms of the recognition by the private sector of the importance of women. And just that point, and something that people used to say before, which is so true, you cannot isolate half of the society. It's almost easy maths. You add more input, you get more output. So it actually makes sense, I think, on all fronts to have more women. Just a quick point, I mean, we talk about the right speed, but I don't know if there is a right speed. It really depends on the country, the company itself. I think we all agree. I definitely agree having more women in a workplace makes it better. We see it, and I hope the men see it. But that's become a fact of life. But setting a quota and forcing it, I'm not sure that's the right way, because then you get the questions of, oh, you only made it because of the quota. And we don't want that hanging above our heads, as we've only made it because of that. And we talk about men should be part of it. In some places they are, because for us, we saw the change in Bahrain 2 years ago. For the longest time ever, we only had one female minister. Now we have 5. And I am the first ever chief executive of the Economic Development Board, 20 years into it. So I'd say that part of that change we're seeing right now. Is there more to be done? Absolutely more to be done. Talking about also like the mom role and the female role, I think I'm sure there are still examples where people get asked when they've just had a baby to just come back and do it. But also we've seen examples of, and I've seen it with some of our teams, that we've accelerated some of the promotions for the females that got married and started having kids, because we knew the slowdown would come later. But it was also because based on their ability. And I've seen it with my own. I think we're setting an example here for women and men, to show an example of how a female that has kids is able to take them in the morning to school, do their homework, go to work, do the 9 to 5 and the 9 to 8 and the 9 to 10, and have a balanced work-life balance. So I think we are showing that example, and that's something that I pride myself in doing. It not always perfect, but I definitely think that Bahrain has provided few examples for people in recent years. So,
very interesting.
Yeah. I'm George Salem from Washington, D.C. I was Solicitor of Labor, a chief labor policy person in the 1980s in the Reagan and Bush administrations. We grappled with this issue, and we forbade quotas, but we allowed affirmative action. Not only did we allow affirmative action, we insisted upon it if you were doing business with the United States government. Therefore, all of the major corporations had to do something they were unaccustomed to doing, which is include women and minorities in the senior ranks, and they had to have an affirmative action plan